On a gray, foggy morning in November of the year 2000, a lonely figure drove his gray Fiat Croma onto a massive bridge in northern Italy. This was the viaduct of General Franco Romano, a stretch of highway known more for its dizzying height than its scenic views. The car stopped. The engine was left running. The hazard lights blinked rhythmically against the dull mist. The man inside stepped out. He was 46 years old, tall and gaunt, wearing oversized clothes that looked out of place for a man of his stature. He walked to the edge of the railing. Below him lay the stony, dry bed of the Stura River, nearly 260 feet down. There were no witnesses to what happened in the final seconds. There was only the empty car, the blinking lights, and then a body lying, broken on the stones below. When the police arrived, they identified the man immediately. It was not just any citizen. It was Edoardo Agnelli. He was the only son of the most powerful man in Italy. He was the heir apparent to the Fiat Empire, the owner of Ferrari, the controller of Juventus, and the prince of a dynasty often called the Kennedys of Italy. The police quickly ruled it a suicide. They said the burden of the name was too much. They said he was depressed. But almost immediately, whispers began to circulate in the dark cafes of Turin. Why was there no autopsy? Why was he buried in such haste? Why did his car show no fingerprints on the door handle? And most importantly, why did his death conveniently solve a massive succession crisis that threatened the future of a multi-billion-dollar empire? This is not just a story about money. It is a story about a curse that seems to follow extreme wealth. It is a story of fathers and sons, of secret bank accounts, of hidden gold, and of a family that owned a country but could not save themselves. If you are ready to step inside the gates of the most exclusive and secretive dynasty in European history, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We are about to unravel a century of secrets, and you will not want to miss what comes next. To understand the tragedy of the body under the bridge, we have to go back to the beginning. We have to understand the sheer weight of the crown that the Agnelli family wore. In Italy, there is the Pope and there are the Agnellis. For over 100 years, this family has been the industrial heartbeat of the nation. It began in 1899. The world was on the brink of a mechanical revolution. A former cavalry officer named Giovanni Agnelli, the grandfather of the modern dynasty, was one of the founding members of Fiat Fabbrica Italiana Automobili Torino, the Italian automobile factory of Turin. Giovanni was a man of steel and vision. He was not an inventor in the garage sense. He was a titan of business. He saw that the car would change the world, but more importantly, he saw that mass production would change Italy. Under his iron grip, Fiat grew at a terrifying pace. By 1910, they were the largest automotive company in Italy. By the 1920s, they controlled nearly 80% of the domestic market. Giovanni, who became known as the Senator, built a vertical empire. He didn't just want to build cars. He wanted to own the steel that made the cars, the rubber that made the tires, and the newspapers that printed the ads for the cars. He bought La Stampa, one of Italy's most prestigious papers. He bought ski resorts. He bought ball-bearing factories. He created a state within a state. Turin became a company town. If you lived in Turin, you likely worked for Fiat, or you worked for a shop that sold lunch to people who worked for Fiat. The air smelled of industry and money. But with this immense power came the first cracks of the so-called Agnelli curse. The senator had a son, also named Edoardo. This first Edoardo was the father of the famous Gianni Agnelli. The first Edoardo was handsome, wealthy, and destined to take over. But in 1935, a seaplane accident cut his life short. He was decapitated by a spinning propeller in a freak accident in the harbor of Genoa. He was only 43. The senator, the old patriarch, was devastated. He had built an empire for his son, and now his son was gone. The line of succession was broken. The senator looked at his grandson, Gianni, who was only a teenager at the time. He decided then and there that this boy, Gianni, would be the next king of Italy. Gianni Agnelli, later known to the world simply as l'avvocato, or the lawyer, although he never truly practiced law, became the symbol of Italian restoration. He was just 14 when his father died. His grandfather took him under his wing, but the lessons were hard. The old senator taught him that feelings were a weakness. He taught him that the company came before everything, even family. Especially family. When the old senator died in 1945, just after the chaos of World War II, the weight of the entire empire fell onto Gianni's shoulders. But Gianni was young. He was in his 20s. He was not ready to sit behind a desk and argue with unions. He wanted to live. And live he did. Before he became the captain of industry, Gianni Agnelli was the most famous playboy in the world. This is the era of the dolce vita, the sweet life. Gianni was handsome, with a distinct, rugged charm. He had a peculiar style that men all over the world copied. He wore his watch over the cuff of his shirt because he claimed he was too busy to pull back his sleeve. He wore hiking boots with bespoke suits. He drove Ferraris at breakneck speeds through the winding roads of the French Riviera. He dated the most beautiful women in the world. He was linked to Rita Hayworth and Anita Ekberg. He was friends with the Kennedys. In the 1950s, Gianni Agnelli was the definition of cool. He was the uncrowned king of Italy. But the party could not last forever. In 1952, Gianni was involved in a horrific car crash. He was driving a Ferrari late at night, rushing to meet a woman when he crashed into a meat truck.
His leg was shattered in multiple places. Doctors considered amputating it. He spent months in traction, in agony. It was a wake-up call. The Playboy era was ending. The industrialist era was beginning. Gianni took the reins of Fiat firmly in 1966. He transformed the company. He navigated Italy through its most turbulent years. These were the years of lead, time of domestic terrorism, strikes, and political assassinations. The Red Brigades, a communist terrorist group, were kidnapping executives and politicians. They targeted Fiat managers.
Gianni Agnelli stood firm. He was the rock. He negotiated with unions, he charmed politicians, and he kept the factories running. He became a symbol of stability. When Gianni Agnelli spoke, the stock market moved. When he attended a Juventus soccer match, the cameras were on him, not the players. He was revered. He was loved. But behind the walls of his massive estate in the hills above Turin, the Villa Frescot, things were not as perfect as they seemed in the glossy magazines. Gianni had married a Neapolitan princess named Mirella Caracciolo. She was an icon of fashion and grace, known as the Swan. Together, they were the golden couple. They had 2 children, a son named Edoardo and a daughter named Margherita. In a traditional Italian dynasty, the firstborn son is everything. He is the heir. He is the future. Edoardo Agnelli, born in 1954, was born with the weight of the entire Italian economy on his shoulders before he could even walk. From a young age, it was clear that Edoardo was different. He was sensitive. He was artistic. He was introverted. He did not care for cars. He did not care for balance sheets. He did not care for the ruthless game of capitalism. Imagine growing up where your father is a national hero, a man who commands respect with a single glance, and you are a gentle soul who prefers poetry to power. The gap between Gianni and Edoardo was wide, and it only grew wider with time. Gianni, the man of action, could not understand his son. He tried to mold him. He sent him to the best schools. He sent him to a military academy. But Edoardo resisted. Edoardo went to America to study at Princeton University. It was there that he drifted further away from the Fiat Empire. He studied modern literature and Oriental philosophy. He began to explore spirituality. He looked for answers not in money, but in religion. He studied Buddhism, and later he developed a deep interest in Islam. He traveled to India. He traveled to Iran. He met with religious leaders. To a man like Gianni Agnelli, who worshipped at the altar of industry and Western capitalism, his son's behavior was baffling, perhaps even embarrassing. While Gianni was meeting with Henry Kissinger and the President of the United States, Edoardo was walking around in flowing robes, talking about the emptiness of material wealth. The press began to label Edoardo as Crazy Eddie. They mocked him, they compared him to his father, and found him wanting. The pressure on Edoardo was immense. He tried occasionally to fit in. He was given positions within the company. He sat on the board of directors of Juventus, the family's beloved soccer team. For a brief moment, he seemed happy there. He famously sat on the bench with the coach during a game. But even there, his eccentricities came out. He criticized the team's management publicly. He spoke his mind, which is something you do not do in the Agnelli family, unless you are the boss. In the 1980s, the relationship between father and son deteriorated. Edoardo gave an interview to a newspaper where he criticized Fiat's involvement in arms manufacturing. He said the company should focus on peace, not war. This was a public relations nightmare for Gianni. The titan of industry could not control his own heir. Slowly, Gianni began to look elsewhere for a successor. He looked at his brother's children. He looked at his wider family. He began to freeze Edoardo out. This rejection broke Edoardo's heart. He worshipped his father. He wanted his father's love, but he could only get his attention by acting out. Edoardo struggled with substance abuse. He was arrested in Kenya for heroin possession in a minor scandal that was quickly hushed up by the family's powerful lawyers. But the damage was done. In the eyes of the establishment, Edoardo was unfit to lead. He was a liability. It was around this time that Gianni Agnelli made a decision that would seal the fate of the family. He chose a new heir. It was not his son. It was his nephew, Giovanni Agnelli. Giovanni was everything Edoardo was not. He was business-minded, charismatic, disciplined, and eager to lead. He was the son of Gianni's younger brother Umberto. The family breathed a sigh of relief. The empire was safe. The succession was secured. Giovanni was groomed to take over. He was called the Chosen One. Edoardo was pushed further into the shadows. He lived in a separate villa on the family estate, isolated, surrounded by his books and his dogs. He watched as his cousin was celebrated as the future king. It was a humiliation. But Edoardo refused to give up his birthright. He told friends that he was the rightful heir. He refused to sign away his rights to the company. He believed that Fiat needed a soul, and he was that soul. But as investigators and historians were about to find out, this family drama was only the tip of the iceberg. The tragedy of the Agnellis was about to spiral into something much darker. We still have the most chilling evidence to uncover, so stay tuned. If you are enjoying this deep dive into the secrets of the ultra-rich, make sure you have hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. In 1997, the curse struck again. The chosen heir, Giovanni Agnelli, the perfect successor, was diagnosed with a rare and aggressive form of stomach cancer. He was 33 years old. Despite all the money in the world, despite the best doctors in America and Europe, he could not be saved. Giovanni died in December of 1997. The family was shattered. Gianni Agnelli, now an old man battling his own health issues, was heartbroken. He had lost his father young. He had nearly died himself, and now his chosen successor was dead. The question of succession roared back to life. Who would take over Fiat? By blood and tradition, it should have been Edoardo. He was the only living male son of the patriarch. But Gianni Agnelli was resolute. He would not let Edoardo run the company. He believed Edoardo would destroy everything he had built. He believed Edoardo was mentally unstable. So Gianni made a radical choice. He skipped a generation. He looked to his daughter, Margherita. Margherita had 3 children from her first marriage to a writer named Alain Elkann. The eldest boy was named John Elkann. John Elkann was barely 21 years old. He was a student. He was quiet, shy, and untested. But Gianni saw something in him. He saw the steel that was missing in Edoardo. Gianni named John Elkann as his successor. He brought the young man onto the board of Fiat. He began to mentor him, just as his grandfather had mentored him 60 years prior. For Edoardo, this was the final insult. His cousin was dead, and instead of turning to him, his father turned to his nephew, a boy young enough to be his son. Edoardo was publicly humiliated. He became more vocal. He wrote letters to the press. He threatened to sue. He told reporters that he would not stand by and watch the company be handed over to a boy who knew nothing about the soul of Fiat. He became a problem, A very loud, very visible problem for a company that valued discretion above all else. The tension at Villa Frescot was suffocating. Edoardo was living on the same grounds as his father, but they were worlds apart. The staff whispered about the shouting matches. Edoardo was gaining weight. He looked disheveled. He was isolated. The year 2000 arrived. Fiat was struggling financially. The global car market was changing. The family needed unity. They needed to present a strong front to the shareholders. Edoardo was the loose cannon. On the morning of November 15, 2000, the house staff at Villa Frescot noticed that Edoardo was gone. This was not entirely unusual, but he had left without his driver. He had taken the gray Fiat Croma. He wore gray trousers, a dark shirt, and a jacket. He did not leave a note on his desk. He drove onto the highway. He drove toward the viaduct of General Franco Romano. This bridge is a massive structure, known locally as the Bridge of Suicides, because of its height. At roughly 10 in the morning, the car was found. The body was found minutes later. The news broke across Italy like a thunderclap. Agnelli suicide. The tragic end of the prince. The media coverage was instant and overwhelming. But almost immediately, the anomalies began to pile up. Normally, in a case of violent death, especially involving a high-profile figure, the police seal the scene. They take fingerprints.
They conduct a thorough autopsy to rule out foul play or drugs. But in the case of Edoardo Agnelli, things happened with suspicious speed. The magistrate on duty arrived at the scene and almost immediately authorized the removal of the body. There was no autopsy performed. The coroner merely inspected the external injuries and declared the cause of death as consistent with the fall.
Why was there no autopsy? The official reason was that the cause of death was obvious. But conspiracy theorists and friends of Edoardo pointed out that an autopsy would have revealed if he had been drugged or incapacitated before the fall. They pointed out that Edoardo had a limp from a previous accident. It would have been difficult for him to climb over the high railing of the bridge without assistance. The car was parked cleanly. The engine was running. It looked staged, some said. Furthermore, Edoardo was a man of deep religious conviction.
While he was troubled, he had always spoken against suicide as a sin in the eyes of God. He had plans for the future. He was writing a book. He was planning a trip to India. People who spoke to him in the days leading up to his death said he sounded agitated, yes, but not suicidal. He was angry. He was ready to fight for his inheritance.
Was it possible that Edoardo was removed? It is a dark theory, one that has never been proven. But the timing was incredibly convenient for the family empire. With Edoardo gone, the path for John Elkann was clear. There was no longer a challenger to the throne. The shares that Edoardo would have inherited, the control he could have exerted, all of that evaporated. The problem was solved. Edoardo was buried quickly in the family crypt in Villarosa, the ancestral home of the Agnellis. The funeral was a somber, private affair. Gianni Agnelli, the old patriarch, looked broken. He had outlived his father, his brother, his nephew, and now his son. The curse was complete. But if the family thought that the death of Edoardo was the end of their troubles, they were wrong. It was just the prelude to a war that would tear the dynasty apart from the inside. This war would not be fought with bodies on a bridge, but with lawyers, private investigators, and forensic accountants. Gianni Agnelli died 3 years later, in January of 2003. He was 81. His death marked the end of an era for Italy. The funeral was broadcast live. Hundreds of thousands of people lined the streets of Turin to say goodbye to l'Avocado. It was treated like a state funeral. Presidents and prime ministers attended. It was a moment of national mourning. In the wake of his death, the will was read. As expected, John Elkann, the grandson, was given control of the empire. He took the keys to Fiat, to Ferrari, to the newspapers, to the soccer team. He was the new king. But then the daughter stood up. Margherita Agnelli, the mother of John Elkann and the only surviving child of Gianni Agnelli. Margherita had initially signed an agreement in 2004. In exchange for selling her shares in the family holding company, she received a massive payout. We are talking about roughly 1.2 billion euros. It was a staggering amount of money. She took the money, along with properties and art, and agreed to step away from the business, leaving her son John in total control. It seemed like a clean break. But a few years later, Margherita began to dig. She realized that something was wrong. The numbers didn't add up. She began to suspect that her father, Gianni, had hidden a vast fortune that was never declared in the will. We are not talking about a few $1,000,000. We are talking about billions. You have to understand how the ultra-rich operate. Gianni Agnelli lived through the Cold War, through the years of terrorism, through unstable Italian governments. He was terrified of losing his wealth. So, like many of his class, he moved money offshore. He had accounts in Switzerland, in Liechtenstein, in the Caribbean. He had shell companies. He had foundations that didn't technically exist on paper in Italy. Margherita hired private investigators. They found evidence of a massive hidden treasure. They found accounts linked to a mysterious entity called December. This was the family holding company, the key to the vault. Margherita claimed that she had been tricked. She claimed that when she signed the settlement in 2004, the consultants and lawyers, who were loyal to her son John and the company, had lied to her about the total size of the estate. She argued that if the estate was actually worth nearly double or triple what they said, she was owed billions more. This set off a legal bomb. Mother sued son. Margherita dragged her own son, John L. Khan, into court. She sued the family advisors. She demanded a full accounting of every cent Gianni Agnelli ever earned. This was not just about greed, she argued. It was about truth. It was about the legitima, the Italian law that guarantees heirs a certain percentage of the estate. If Gianni had hidden assets, he had defrauded the Italian state of taxes, and he had defrauded her of her birthright. The revelations were sensational. The investigation uncovered rooms full of art that had no paper trail. Works by Monet, Picasso, and Bacon that were worth tens of millions just hanging on walls in Swiss villas, technically owned by offshore companies. There were rumors of gold bars hidden in vaults beneath the Zurich airport. There were lists of accounts with code names. The family, led by John Elkann, fought back viciously. They painted Margherita as a greedy, estranged mother who had already received over €1 billion and was simply coming back for more. They argued that she had signed a contract and that was the end of it. They tried to keep the documents sealed. They said she was betraying the memory of her father. But Margherita was relentless. She had the spirit of her father, perhaps more than anyone realized. She wasn't fighting for the money to buy bread. She was fighting for power and recognition. She felt she had been pushed aside, just like her brother Edoardo. She felt that the men in suits, the advisors, the lawyers, had conspired to cut her out and install her son as the puppet king. The battle raged for over a decade and continues in various forms even today. It exposed the dark underbelly of Italy's most polished family. It showed that beneath the glamour, the Ferraris, and the Riviera vacations, there was deep dysfunction. It showed a family where money was more important than blood. The investigation into the hidden assets also raised questions about the death of Edoardo. Margherita herself began to question the official narrative. If there were billions of dollars hidden offshore, dollars that Edoardo would have technically inherited a share of, did that give someone a motive to ensure he never claimed it? If Edoardo had been alive when Gianni died, he would have been the primary obstacle to the smooth transfer of power to John Elkann. With Edoardo gone, the path was clear. Margherita publicly stated that she did not believe her brother committed suicide. She called it too convenient. Let's pause and look at the sheer scale of what was at stake. Fiat was not just a car company. By the early 2000s, it was struggling, yes, but it still held the keys to Italian industry. Under John Elkann's leadership, and with the help of a brilliant CEO named Sergio Marchionne, Fiat would go on to acquire Chrysler in America. They would create Stellantis, one of the largest automotive groups in the world. The value of the company skyrocketed. If Edoardo had been in charge, would this have happened? Probably not. Edoardo was a philosopher, not a corporate raider. From a purely cold, business perspective, Edoardo's removal saved the empire. And that is the most chilling thought of all. The story of the Agnellis is a modern Greek tragedy. You have the patriarch, Gianni, who conquers the world but loses his soul. You have the tragic son, Edoardo, who tries to escape the weight of the crown and is crushed by it. You have the daughter, Margarita, who turns into an avenging fury, tearing down the walls of the palace to find the gold hidden inside. And you have the grandson, John Elkin, the survivor, the one who sits on the throne today, cold and efficient, ruling over a global empire that was built on brilliance but cemented with blood and betrayal. As we look back at the image of that gray Fiat Croma stopped on the bridge, the hazard lights blinking in the fog, we realize that it represents the crossroads of the dynasty. One path led to humanity, to spirituality, to a rejection of power. That was Edoardo's path, and it ended on the rocks below. The other path led to consolidation, to global expansion, to the preservation of wealth at all costs. That was the path the family chose. Today, the Agnelli family is wealthier than ever. They own Ferrari, they own The Economist, they own huge stakes in Stellantis. They are global players, but the cost was the family itself. The dinners at Villa Frescot are no longer filled with laughter. The crypt in Via Perosa is full, and the lawsuits fly back and forth like arrows in a civil war. The Agnellis prove that you can buy everything in the world. You can buy the best cars, the best soccer players, the best lawyers, and the best doctors. But you cannot buy peace. You cannot buy a happy ending. The curse of the Agnellis is not supernatural. It is the curse of unchecked ambition. It is the curse of believing that you are above the rules of ordinary men. The investigation into the hidden wealth is still ongoing in Italian courts. New accounts are still being discovered. The ghost of Gianni Agnelli still looms over Turin, casting a long shadow that his descendants are desperately trying to escape. And somewhere in the quiet corners of the city, people still talk about Edoardo. They leave flowers near the bridge. They remember the prince who didn't want to be king. Thank you for watching. This was a story of immense complexity, and we've only scratched the surface of the legal battles that are still unfolding. What are your theories? Do you believe Edoardo's death was truly a suicide, or is there something darker at play? Do you think Margarita is right to pursue the hidden fortune? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this long-form story, please give it a like and share it with someone who loves a true mystery. I'll see you in the next video.